Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Cunliffe does bring up an interesting point. Mr. Cosgrove and I alluded to it, but you never know, it could arise. Under Article 2 functions, Part 3, it actually says the fund is to encourage private investment in projects, enterprise and activities contributing to economic development in the region, in particular in infrastructure and other productive sectors, and to supplement private investment when, and this is the important part, private capital is not available on reasonable terms and conditions. And I suppose there could be an argument that, why would private capital invest in a wharf in Opotiki, did you say, Mr. Cunliffe? In a wharf in Opotiki, if the government backs down from saying we won't invest in this, and yet there are defined social and economic benefits for that reason, then I suppose there is nothing stopping, I don't know if it would be the Opotiki District Council or whoever, applying to the bank, I assume it probably has to be through the New Zealand government, for funds to build this bank on reasonable terms and conditions. And again, what defines reasonable terms and conditions? They may look at the New Zealand market and say, well, there's a risk premium in this, and therefore it's going to be at quite high interest rates. Or then again, it could be at the rates that you borrow money from a bank in China, which is negligible interest rates. Who knows? I mean, I find it difficult. It's an interesting proposition, but you never know, it might occur. Mr. Chair, what I would like to look at is Schedule A. This is on page 30 of the bill, and this talks about, well, this lists the countries and the number of shares in their capital subscription to this fund. And it is interesting because there are 37 regional countries and there are 20 non-regional members who have decided to contribute money in varying amounts to this fund. And it really goes to show that according to the amount of money going in, there really has been a gap in the funding infrastructure or in the funding mechanisms to really drive infrastructural growth forward, hence the need for this bank, because as a number of speakers have alluded to, America has been dead against this because it thinks the old institutions already fit the bill. But I would suggest that by looking at the countries who have invested in this, Mr. Chair, that perhaps America is on a little bit of a limb when they believe that, in fact, there is no need for such a bank. Time will tell. But let's have a look at some of these countries. Let's start at the top, Australia. And when we say that one of the Americans' concerns about this is that the governance would not be up to scratch, there are a number of countries here, Mr. Chair, who would not go near this if they believed that the infrastructure or the governance arrangements for this bank were anything but absolutely first class and in line with the expectations of developed countries. So we've got Australia. Australia actually putting in $3.69 billion. That's a lot of money. The reason why I think Australia are putting so much money in is they've said they're very much part of this region, and they're very keen to see these markets grow, because as being a commodity producer, they need to move their economy from pure commodities towards finished goods and other products, and they see this market as a very important one. So they're putting in 3.69. Azerbaijan is putting in $254 million. Now, I'm not even too sure where Azerbaijan is. I know it's part of the old Soviet Union. I had to ask Mr. Goff, who I think has been to 190 of the 192 countries that exist in the world. It's warm and dry, and even Mr. Goff said it's one of the very few countries, one of about 3 countries in the world he hasn't been to. But they have decided...
weapons there.
Oh, did they? Well, they've decided that they need to diversify their economy. They're part of this region. They're actually putting in $254 million themselves. And I would suggest, I don't know how big the economy of Azerbaijan is, but I suspect it's not particularly developed. Well, Mr. Bennett knows a lot about it. But I would suggest this is a substantial amount of money or a substantial commitment from an economy that understands the value of development. Bangladesh, keeping in mind, Mr. Chair, we've committed $461 million, this is US dollars. Bangladesh have committed $660 million US dollars. Now, Bangladesh are a country we tend to see in the newspaper when there's a massive flood that wipes out villages and it causes great devastation. They understand the implications of such a bank, and I suspect places like Bangladesh will actually benefit substantially from the infrastructural development that'll go on in the region, and it may well happen in their country. They are committing $660 million US dollars. Mr. Speaker, Brunei, Mr. Chair. There's a few more countries.
I'm slightly stretched on the relevance, but
well, I'm talking about Schedule A here. And what I will do, Mr. Chair, is let's talk about how some of the really big economies see the development of this and understand the value of development in this region. We've got China. I mean, we all know that China is one of the driving forces behind this. But, you know, they are the world's second largest economy, in my view, not long before they're the world's largest. But they're putting in nearly $30 billion. That is a substantial, that's about 27%, well, close to 30% of all the money committed to this is being put in by China. India is putting in $8 billion. And again, I suspect that India will be a recipient of a lot of the development that goes on in the region because, you know, they are a country which is on a fast track to developed nation status. Indonesia is putting in $3.3 billion. And even Iran is putting in $1.5 billion. So as we can see, this certainly isn't an American-backed or a Chinese-backed alliance. When we've got countries like Iran, Israel is putting in 749, and interestingly, Israel becomes below Iran in the schedule. I think it's probably the only time you'll see them side by side. We've got Korea putting in $3.7 billion. But, Mr. Chair, it's not only these countries within the region, Turkey's putting in $2.6 billion, but it's not only the countries that are within this region that are putting in a substantial amount of money. It's about 3/4 or $75 billion, or it is 3/4 of all the money heading into the fund. But the interesting thing for me, Mr. Chair, is the non-regional members who are actually putting in a substantial amount of money. And these are the ones who recognise the absolute potential for their own domestic markets in growing the Asia-Pacific market. We've got Brazil is putting in $3.1 billion. And heaven knows they're spending a lot of money at the moment developing Olympic Stadium and that sort of care, and that should be a good tournament. We have actually got France is putting in $3.3 billion, and Germany is putting in $4.4 billion. So when the Americans had concerns about the governance or the arrangements or the legitimacy of this bank, I suspect that they are one of very few countries in the OECD that has such concerns. Because when Germany is committing $4.4 billion to this bank, then you know that it is, there's something going on. Italy, $2.5 billion. We've even got Luxembourg committing $69 billion. Sorry, $69 million. Again, I don't know the size of the Luxembourg economy, but I suspect, well, I do know it's not a particularly big one. So $69 billion is a lot of money for them to put in. The last thing I would say, Mr. Chair, there are just a couple more economies that from outside the region that are putting in $1 billion or more. They're the Netherlands, they are Spain, and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's putting in $3 billion. I suppose the point I'm trying to highlight, Mr. Chair, is that this shouldn't be seen as just a regional bank funded by regional players for the benefit just of our regional and local economies. This is a bank that has international buy-in. I think it'll play a significant part in the coming years of the development of the economies that are actually going to drive growth within our own economy and certainly the region. And that's why I'm supporting it and very pleased to support it. Thank you very much.